When I came to New York City from Toronto for graduate school in my early 20s, I didn't expect to settle here permanently. But because life doesn't always go as planned, I ended up marrying a New Yorker and starting a family in the suburbs of NYC. There are many aspects of life in suburban New York that I expected to differ from life in downtown Toronto, where I grew up and lived my entire life before the move. Budgeting, however, was one aspect I didn't think would change much. When I think about budgeting, I think about credit card bills, groceries, clothes, eating at restaurants, seeing movies. As a parent of young children and a homeowner, I now add mortgage, childcare, and healthcare cost. And when you live in the suburbs with children, so much more comes into play. Cars, gas, even birthday presents for your kids' friends. I didn't really think about how taxes would change my budget a decade ago. Not just income tax and property tax, but sales tax, tax rebates, tax subsidies. The tax structures in the US and Canada, and even more specifically in New York State and Ontario, significantly impact how, where, and how much of my money I spend. As a Canadian living in the US and a city girl from Toronto living in the New York suburbs, here are 5 somewhat surprising budgeting differences I've kept track of. Number 1, sales tax, or the hidden cost of stuff. In Toronto, purchasing pretty much anything includes almost 15% in sales tax, between the federal goods and services tax, GST, and the provincial sales tax, PST. The numbers fluctuate a bit sometimes, but the bottom line is there is a substantial additional cost when buying things. In New York, there is state sales tax, but not only is it quite a bit lower, it also only applies to certain purchases, and to purchases over a certain amount, depending on the type of item. This ends up meaning that making purchases of anything from clothes to birthday presents to toys can be quite a bit more out of pocket in Toronto. On top of that, GST can apply to services as well. So a gym membership, for example, might be a little bit more than you anticipated. Keeping in mind the hidden extra costs makes shopping in Toronto versus New York an experience in math. Number 2, cars and trains and parking, oh my! In Toronto, I had no car and used public transit and the occasional taxi or Uber. In suburban New York with a family, we have 2 cars and also pay for monthly parking at the commuter rail station, a monthly commuter rail pass, and a monthly subway pass. Living in the suburbs, as many Americans do, often means you regularly use and have to pay for more than one mode of transportation. Just getting to work every day involves multiple things I pay for: my car and gas, my parking, my railroad ticket, my subway ticket, for one day's commute. Toronto and many Canadian cities are unique in that many people live in homes within the city proper, and do so without cars, or with one car for a family. Whereas I drive my kids to daycare, drive to the train, and take the train to work, and then do it all in reverse at the end of the day. My brother in Toronto walks his kids to daycare and then walks or rides his bike to work. The experience is a very different one financially. Number 3, so you want to own a home. The cost of buying a house anywhere in Toronto proper is absurd. Home ownership is a lofty and often unattainable goal, even in the closer suburbs. As a result, many people rent indefinitely. Meanwhile, in suburban New York, buying a home isn't quite as financially burdensome up front. In the suburbs, it can actually be difficult to find a rental, as most people own their houses. I remember my dad being shocked that I could afford a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house within 45 minutes of NYC as a starter home, because in the areas around Toronto, that's unheard of. But there are big differences in owning and renting, beyond just putting the money down up front. While a monthly mortgage may be comparable to monthly rent, when owning a home, there is a constant stream of extra costs that renters usually aren't on the hook for. As a homeowner, I have to budget for all sorts of repairs, from tiny to major. New wiring 3 months after buying the house? That's on me. I have to budget for things like lawn care and private snow removal too. If I were still living in Toronto, we would probably be renting a house or apartment, and our budget wouldn't need to include home maintenance. Number 4, take me home to visit. My entire family still lives in Toronto, and I am very close with all of them. That means I pack up my family of 4 here in New York at least 3 or 4 times a year to head back to Toronto to visit. Sometimes we drive, which means gas and tolls, and sometimes we fly, which means airline tickets for 4 people, plus parking at the airport in New York. We like to go on vacation once a year as a family, as many people do and budget for, but multiple additional trips to Toronto definitely eat into our budget. Number 5, the exchange rate. And finally, the exchange rate. This one often works out in my favor now that I live in New York. But when I do travel home or buy something from a Canadian store, I am factoring in the exchange rate. Sometimes the benefits are outweighed by that pesky double sales tax I mentioned earlier. but occasionally I can save a little bit of money by buying something when I'm in Toronto, or hitting up all that family to buy it for me and send it my way.